Now on the Boise Dev Podcast, there's a new leader at the top of the Boise Metro Chamber of Commerce.
I want the Boise Chamber to be an organization that people look to help solve solutions, help advocate, just help being a good partner.
We chat with Bobbi-Jo Meuleman about her path to the CEO position at the Boise Metro Chamber and more. It's on the Boise Dev Podcast, next. This episode of the Boise Dev Podcast is sponsored by Lombard Conrad Architects. If you're a frequent Boise Dev reader, you've probably seen their credit on renderings on many cool projects. This Idaho-based firm is focused on designing public architecture through a spirit of collaboration. They've been in business for more than 50 years, and you'd recognize their work from the Velma V. Morrison Center for the Performing Arts to the Ada County Courthouse and Meridian City Hall, and that stunning new Center for Visual Arts along Capitol Boulevard at Boise State. That's their work too. Lombard Conrad Architects values partnership and community above all else. They say it's what drives them to fulfill a simple yet significant mission to enrich and inspire the human spirit through architecture in public spaces. You can learn more at lombardconrad.com. Thanks to Lombard Conrad Architects for their support of Boise Dev.
This is the Boise Dev Podcast. Here's your host, Don Day.
Bobbi-Jo Meuleman with the Boise Chamber, Boise Metro Chamber of Commerce.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us on the Boise Dev Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
We've been trying to book fun guests this year, and I was excited to have you come and join us. We always like to start with history a little bit. Mm-hmm. Where'd you grow up?
So I was born and raised in Montana.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what part? The big state?
Yeah.
Montana's like 3 states, I feel like.
Yeah, it is 56 counties. It's very big.
Yeah.
So I grew up in the southern part of the state called Ennis, which was very small. Our high school, which was 9 through 12, had 120 kids. My mom is from the northern part of the state, which is actually where I was born, but then we moved when I was at a young age to the southern part, a place called Browning, which is way north. It's almost to Glacier Park, like right by Glacier Park, almost to Canada. Like that's where we go shopping. And so my mom comes from a family. It was a ranching and farm operation. And so always knew that they would have to eventually move back there. And so it was my sophomore year of high school, my brother's senior year of high school, and things had changed, some stuff with my grandparents' health. And so they were like, we're going to get your brother through his senior year, but then you're going to have to move to a new school your junior year of high school.
Oh my gosh.
So moved from
like the
Ennis.
Worst possible time, right?
Well, I was actually, I was like, okay, right? Like, I don't know, it was pretty laid back.
Yeah.
And so we moved when I was a junior to a place called Browning, which is actually an Indian reservation. So moved there when I was a junior in high school and graduated high school there. My folks lived there until a few years ago. Now they live in a different part, but went to college in Missoula. Go Grizz, they're here for the Big Sky. Yeah. Have a long history of Montana roots for sure.
My mom grew up in Columbia Falls, and my grandparents lived in West Glacier, the other side of the park.
Yes.
So
my brother lived in Whitefish for a long time.
Oh, my grandmother was born there.
Yeah.
So all the Montana.
Look at the connection.
Yeah, there you go. So you grew up in Montana, and big wide open state.
Mm-hmm.
You get into your career, and you decide, I think I'll try politics.
Right.
Maybe not that simple. But tell us about the kind of start of your career.
Yeah.
How that happened.
So it wasn't planned, right? I guess some people do, but I don't think most people are like, I just want to be in government, right? I want to be in politics, right?
You did get a poli-sci degree. Right?
So
a little bit of thought.
Yeah. And so when I got enrolled at the University of Montana to pick a major, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I always liked my government classes, found them interesting. So I was like, what the heck? I'll get a degree in political science. And it was my junior year at the U of M. I did an internship in Washington, D.C. for a senator from Montana. And you look at things that are like pivotal points in your life that kind of maybe changed or defined you, and that's definitely one of them.
Was that Senator Burns?
Senator Conrad Burns, yeah. And so I went back and did that, and I was actually supposed to just be there from January through April because it was just a few month internship. And I actually, my first month there, their staff assistant, which is the person, answers the phones, is kind of on the first line with all the constituents, had left. And so the chief of staff was like, hey, I know I just meshed really well with the office. I knew the state really well of, I think, living in one part for so long and then moving to a different part. Like I really knew the state of Montana really well. And so he said, hey, well, can we hire you on and would you stay through the summer? Right. And, 21-year-old, like just had hit the jackpot. Right. So I was like, of course.
Somebody's going to give me money every
right.
2 weeks.
I mean, I think it might've been poverty, but still it was making money.
Right.
So I actually ended up staying. And it's funny because it was the same chief of staff who asked me to stay on. I went to him and I was like, I can just keep doing this. I don't need to go back and finish my last year of college. And he was like, no, you absolutely need to go back and finish your last year of college. And so I went back and finished my last year in Missoula, and then they kept a spot open for me. So I graduated on a Saturday and loaded up the truck with my mom and dad on a Tuesday and moved back to DC. And that's where I met my husband, who was working for Larry Craig at the time. And so that's how I have the Idaho connection.
Obviously, those senators
from him.
worked together closely.
Yeah,
Still do, I would imagine.
It was really fun. When we were there, Western states, they kind of just bonded together. So I hung out a lot with folks from Idaho and Wyoming, Alaska, Oregon. It was just, they all naturally gravitated towards each other, which was really fun.
So you do that, you go back, you spend time in DC, find love.
Yes.
And somehow you make it to the Boise Metro.
Yes.
Tell us how that happened.
So my husband got engaged in DC, and he got a job back here in Boise. And so I was like, well, I guess I'm moving to Idaho, right? And people will hear me talk a lot about, like, especially in the political world, in the government world, and in the business world, just in general, a lot has to do with your relationships. And I was then working for a congressman from Montana, Congressman Denny Rehberg, and him and Governor Butch Otter were very good friends because they served together. And so I moved out here, right, not knowing anyone, not really knowing what I was going to do. And he made a call and made a connection for me into Governor Otter's office, and was really fortunate to get a job in his office, which then started my kind of Idaho government trajectory, if you call it.
So is that when he was in the House then?
So they were friends when Governor Otter was a congressman, but when I moved out here, he was in his first term of governor. Okay. Yeah, it was 2009.
So you worked for Governor Otter for a number of years.
Yes.
And then you jump over to a state agency.
Correct.
Tell us about that transition and where you went.
Yeah, it was really a cool experience. I always tell people, if you're going to work in state government and you want to work at an agency, Department of Commerce or Parks and Rec are probably the two best in my view, because you don't regulate, you just promote and support. And that experience at Commerce is something I will just always be so grateful for. I went under with Megan Ronk, who was just a great mentor, a great leader. It was perfect for me at the time too, because she had young children, I had young children. So two moms really trying to figure out that balance, when part of your job is you have to go to Taiwan, or, you have to be all around the state. And so it was like the perfect job at the perfect time for me, just, in the spot I was with my kids. I just had the best opportunity of, working for Governor Otter. I knew a lot of people, right? I knew a lot about the cool businesses in Idaho, but that job really took it to the next level, right? My job was to travel around and, promote people to come here, but then also support our businesses. And so getting to travel around the state and see all the cool things that are going on here was really awesome. And then a lot of international travel, which is stuff that, I would never have had those experiences. So
what are some highlights? Where are some places you got to go?
So I was at Commerce for 2 years, and I went to Taiwan 3 times.
Oh, wow.
There's such a strong partnership between Taiwan and Idaho. It's really amazing to see. One of those trips to Taiwan was Governor Otter. They did a farewell tour for him, his last year of governor. So that was really cool to get to go do that with him. And it was me and the director of Department of Agriculture at the time, Celia Gould. And just to go to see, like, the appreciation and respect that they had for him, and to get to see the emotion inside of him of getting to experience that. That was really cool. I went to Japan, which was neat. Canada a couple times, those sort of things. Mm-hmm. But probably those Taiwan trips were the coolest. The first Taiwan trip that I went on, because from Montana, right? Like we'd gone to Canada. Like
Yeah.
I had never done
Yeah.
any international travel, right? Whereas my husband's the opposite, right? He did so much international travel when he was younger, and that's just not what my family, we just didn't do that.
Sure.
And so my first trip to Taiwan, I land and we have a trade office there. And the trade manager meets me at the terminal. His name is Eddie. And he was like, "We have to go now." And I was like, "What is going on?" He's like, "There is a typhoon hitting. We have to go now." I was like, "What?" First time ever traveling. Taiwan's very far, right? So I'm like, "What is
Across
happening?"
the date line.
I mean, it's like the
thing.
whole
Yeah.
thing, right? Like your first international big trip like that. And so that he gets me to the hotel. He's like, "Your whole schedule for tomorrow has been canceled. We're like tentative the next day." And I was only there for 3 days. And so I, went to my room and, your jet lag of how you sleep or whatever. And so I got up in the morning sometime and I went and looked outside and it's rainy. And I was like, this is silly, right? I was like, I'm at least going to like go get my tennis shoes on and my rain jacket and at least go walk around. And in the time it like took me to do all of that, I go to leave. And at this time they've got like the doors boarded and trees are just like, the wind's blowing so bad they're just like hitting the ground. And I was like, okay, I'm just gonna stay here. So my first Taiwan trip was in a hotel for 2 days as this, and it was a deadly storm. Like people died. I mean, it was crazy. So I'll never forget that trip either. As I flew in as the Taiwan was hitting, I'm like, why did the plane even take off from? I think I left out of Seattle, maybe.
Yeah, and then you get there and people say, "I go to the hotel and hunker down." You literally hunkered down.
I know, and then I like felt so bad because I'm like, here I am, like hunkered down in this hotel, and all these people that are, just working, and it made me feel really bad.
Yeah, I bet. So you spend a couple years in commerce, and then there's a transition in administrations, and I think fairly friendly transition.
Yes.
But you leave commerce and decide it's time to do something new again.
Yes.
But in the same realm. What happened there?
Yeah, so I have worked with Governor Little ever since I moved to Idaho. Worked very closely with him in Governor Otter's office, as they had such a great, strong partnership. And then at Commerce, worked really close with him as he was kind of the lead on economic development for Governor Otter. So when he won governor, I had every intention of try to see if I can get Commerce again because I was enjoying it. And he reached out and asked me to come back into his personal office and kind of lead an effort that I don't think a governor had since maybe Governor Kemp Thorne, and that was an intergovernmental affairs position. And so I chose to do it, go back in his office, which I'm really glad I did. Getting to be there at the start of a new administration is really fun. It's really exciting. It was something really cool to be part of, and I will always cherish that time. Went into his office and led his intergovernmental affairs. So, working closely with your legislative partners, your mayors, your county commissioners, tribal partners, federal delegation. And then he had me do the business issues for the office because it made sense that I had just left commerce. And then did that, and then got promoted to be his deputy chief of staff and took on some more issues as well. When I left, I was doing transportation and tax commission as well. So really great experience working with him. Governor Little has always had such an aggressive legislative agenda. So got to be part of some really cool efforts in his office that it was just fun to be part of that.
So intergovernmental affairs kind of leads you to the current job. Long process, 3-month process for the Boise Metro Chamber gig.
Yes.
Competitive, I understand. I know a bunch of people who were up for it. Yeah. So lots of impressive folks. What made you decide, hey, I'm going to leave government, I'm going to try and work in sort of an advocacy role?
So it was interesting as I think things just sometimes happen. You're not planning for them. And I had some folks approach me about the job, and you don't really think about it much, sure. Right? And then conversations kept having. It was really my husband who was like, you really should probably look into this.
Partner
right?
Spouse is great.
Right? They are. They just give you a different perspective because you're so in the moment. Everything's working. You know what I mean? And so it was really him. And so I did explore it. And I think what really made me interested about it was all the different components of the chamber job are all things I've gotten to do throughout my career that I've really enjoyed. The community engagement is something I've always enjoyed. Working with the business sector, I've enjoyed that. Obviously, the advocacy component of it, that's what I know. It's, what I've done. And then, looking at the board, like the chamber board is such a great group of people. And so I really think it was all those different components together. And, sometimes you do have to, why it's great we do have spouses to take a minute and be like, well, wow, I guess I have been doing, it's been 20 years if you count 6 years in DC and 14 in Idaho. And you're like, first of all, I didn't realize I'm that old, right? Like, how did that happen?
I know, right?
And so sometimes you do, you're like, you know what, maybe it is always good to continue to like push yourself and maybe try something that makes you uncomfortable. So it was really my husband that pushed me to look into it.
Okay, Bobbi-Jo Meuleman with the Boise Metro Chamber of Commerce.
Yes.
Let's talk about what's next.
Okay.
It's our event today. You've been in the job at the chamber for 7 or 8 months.
It'll not even 6.
Okay, you got the job about the time my son was born, so
Okay.
similar timing.
Yeah.
And it's been a long 6 months for me. I bet for you.
Well, I hope he's doing well.
He's doing great.
Yes.
So tell us about what the early days have been like and what some of your priorities have been.
So early days, one thing that was really cool about the interview process is the interview committee asked for a work plan, which is something I wish I would have always done, right? And so they had me break it out into like first 90 days, first 6 months, year, like that, right? Sure. And so I've really tried to follow that, which again has been cool to have that. But for me, when I first started, was you got to get to know the team, right? This is a team that has been together for a long time under the same leader, right? So
how many folks are over there?
25 total.
Wow.
But
does that include
BVEP and Visit Boise?
But still it's
a good size, yeah. And so for me, it was really important to take the time to get to know the team. When my first day, I got all of them together and was basically like, I'm going to be doing one-on-ones with all of you. And this right now is just to kind of let you know I'm not a psycho, right? Like, I'm, in my view,
they're
I'm
like,
pretty.
I'll be the judge of that. Yeah.
They're all probably like, sure. But I did. I met individually with every single staff member and asked them all 3 questions, amongst other things. But what do you like about here? What would you change? What are some recommendations? So took the time to do that. And I did the same with my board. I went and sat down individually with every one of my board members and asked them each 3 questions, kind of similar questions. So that really consumed my time, right? Is the first couple months. Also learning our leadership programs, right? That's been a big thing for me is, most all the other stuff the chamber does, right? I've been pretty engaged in it. I know what it is. I'm pretty familiar with it, but I hadn't with our leadership program. So I've been spending a lot of time trying to better understand Leadership Boise Young Professional, the alumni, all of those groups. So that has really kind of, taken up a lot of the time as I first started. For me, obviously, everyone's like, what's your goal for this first year?
Are you looking at my notes?
No.
Yeah.
I figured you would.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's, obviously, if in 1 year, if we've, the team hit 2,000 members, which was a really big accomplishment. And so for me, achievement is maintaining and growing that membership, right? And so really trying to define for me in this first year is, so when we bring in new members, right? Like we're really good about when you get a new member, they get attention. There's a pretty good plan with that. But, most of our members are existing members. And I really, truly believe the best way to grow your membership is to retain your existing membership.
Keep that churn low.
Right. And it's, if your biggest selling point to a business to join is them seeing who's already a member. And so really trying to kind of look at from that perspective, okay, what are we doing on the retention side, right? Like knowing we have to continue to bring in new members, but that turn rate, right? Like even if you can keep like 20 of them or whatever. And so that's been a big thing for me is working with the team of some ideas of, how we ensure, we're providing value. And, we have really big businesses. We have medium-sized businesses, but most of our businesses are small. right? And so really going to try to deep dive on how you provide that value to them.
So you talk about kind of some tactical goals.
Mm-hmm.
What's your overall vision for the chamber? Where do you see it in a longer term time, and where do you want it to go?
I want the Boise Chamber to be considered a good partner, right? I want the Boise Chamber to be an organization that people look to help solve solutions, help advocate, just help being a good partner. I think we have the privilege at the Chamber of we represent over 2,000 businesses right now, right? And we all know that things are really great in this community, but we all know that we have to make sure we're making the right investments and planning for the future to ensure we stay that way, right? And those are things where I think the chamber can be such a resource, being part of those efforts, being part of the vision of keeping this place how we want to keep it.
So when you look at that, you've been there, obviously there's been a leader in place for a long time, you're new in the role. Do you see changes in structure or form or outreach?
Yeah.
Are you going to put your stamp on things? Makes it sound like things are not working well, but how do you see things evolving as you really dig in?
And I think that is one thing. I took over a thriving chamber, right? Bill did a great job. I'm in such a great spot because I took over a chamber that's doing good, right? And so it's an opportunity to look at things and say, well, if it's not broke, let's not fix it. But where are areas that we could change? Are there things we should be doing different, right? And I just think too, we all have our different management styles,
Sure.
right? Like I think I'm very much, more engaged in the weeds. Part of that is because I'm trying to learn, right?
Yeah.
But I think too, finding more of those opportunities where those natural partnerships make sense, right? And so, working more with our Treasure Valley chambers, that's a big goal for me, which is going great. Meridian, Nampa, Caldwell, they all have great people and we work well together.
So we should maybe explain that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It's the Boise Metro Chamber. Boise doesn't really have its own chamber that I'm aware of, but a lot of the individual cities do.
They do. Mm-hmm.
But the Boise Metro Chamber is larger.
Basically, our footprint is Caldwell to, or I get Mountain Home to Caldwell.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Treasure Valley.
Treasure Valley, yeah, for sure. And so, a lot of, they have their own, right? And so a lot of times there's crossover with membership.
Mm-hmm.
But, basically all advocating for the same things, right? And so I think, we're stronger when we're together. And so I think with me, you're going to just see a lot more of those partnerships. Hopefully you're going to see the chamber at a lot more engaged in some of these discussions, right? And, one thing is it's looking at, we do a lot of events at the chamber, right? So are there areas where maybe we could change up some of those things? Or again, if it's not broken wire, we don't need to fix it.
Right.
One thing too, that's a big thing for me is when we do things, you're going to see this at our leadership conference this year. So our leadership conference this year, the topic is energy. I want to focus on what our members are doing in that space. Same with like the gala, right? Like how can we have that balance of bringing in a speaker, but also highlighting the great things that members or this area is doing. So that's one thing that I really want to focus on is, how can we highlight our existing members more, right? When we're having these kind of platforms.
So I was going to talk about the leadership conference a little bit later. We've attended the last few years. It's always a newsy event. There's always interesting things going on. This year's theme, energy. What will those explain too for people? This is political leaders and business leaders, and they all get together now each year in Sun Valley for a couple days to kind of talk about issues. You talk about change. What do you hope the takeaways from that will be?
Yeah. It's interesting you say that because me and my board chair have talked a lot about the leadership conference. And I think our goal for this year is it's such a, energy is a big topic, right? It's things are ever changing, right? And we're hopeful that people go away and say, there's a lot of cool things happening here in Idaho. Mm-hmm. And they come away with maybe some ideas and good partnerships, right? If it's, well, these municipalities are doing this in grid resiliency, or there's this technology, or there's these things, right? So they come away with an idea, right? Or they come away with some natural partnerships. Also, too, for me, anyone that knows me, I want to make it fun, right? It's so much about what we do is networking. It's bringing people together, which form those natural partnerships. So I want to make it fun, right? And so we're doing a couple things different this year to try to add a little bit more networking, a little more kind of fun to it. So
Sure.
excited to see how that goes, as this is my first one.
Yeah. So let's talk about the business landscape in general in the Boise Valley. People always like to say it's really strong, and it is historically. Doesn't mean it always is.
Yeah.
We're in an interesting time. We're now 4 years out from kind of the start of the COVID pandemic, and a lot of recovery has happened, but there's definitely kind of a change in the atmosphere. How does the chamber adapt when the needs of the business community adjust and change?
That's a really great question, and I think it sparks when people ask me, kind of taking on this job, what is your number one fear? And I think it's that and the uncertainty of the economy. You put those two things together, and a lot of times, for a member-based organization, those things have a really big impact. And I think you're seeing it right now, whereas we're growing and we're thriving. Our every year we do a legislative forum lunch, and this year we did the economy. We had a title of the economy, and we had a couple of legislators, but then we had chamber members. We had one representing the tourism industry, one representing construction, and one representing finance. And I think uncertain is the only way you can say it, because you have, the construction company, right? They sell equipment, so they know real time where projects are going to be. It's growing. Anyone can see,
Sure,
right? Like
yeah.
there's construction's
Cranes
booming
in the
here,
air,
right?
yeah.
Everywhere. From a tourism perspective, we still have people, like, it's been discovered, right? This region too brings in so much for tourism. I don't think people actually understand the impact it has. Again, right now.
Listen to our last episode of the
Okay.
podcast with Carrie. Where we
I
talked
know,
about that.
I actually did, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so, but then from the financial sector, right? Interest rates are high. People's tendencies seem to be, they're not buying, people are just more cautious, right? And so it is interesting for me in this job to see the different perspectives of the economy. Everyone is there going to be a recession? Is there not going to be a recession? And so I think for a business organization, it goes back to, right, when, businesses are going to go through ebbs and flows at different times, right? And so ensuring we're providing that value, right? So, we can help them and they stick with us. And so that is, I would say from my perspective, that is the number one thing I do worry about, is ensuring we're doing a good job on that.
There's been this kind of worry about a recession, not just nationally, but locally for the last really 2 years.
Yeah.
Hasn't really materialized.
Right.
And it often seems like, I used to work at a local media organization here in town, and my boss there would always say, yeah, we're usually about 18 months late to it and about 18 months late coming out.
Yeah.
And it tends to bear out. No recession yet.
I know.
But everybody's kind of, you've seen people act like, oh, maybe we're going to have
Right.
one. Investment's a little funny. You're seeing really interesting dynamics in the growth and construction. People who are like, oh, I got this project, we're going to wait.
Yeah.
And you don't know when that's going to happen.
So many, they're like, yeah, we're moving, but we've delayed it 6 months to see if things go down, or to get the supplies, or there's a lot of those external factors right now that play into things.
So the chamber is just trying to be agile to that and adapt in real time to something that is hard to predict.
Yep.
So you talk about tourism a bit, and we did talk about that at great length on the last episode for people listening. But how do you see that being a focus? Is that a major driver going forward, or just one component?
I think tourism is a major driver, especially for this metro. The amount of, and it's not just people coming, right, to visit, right? I think it's the impact this area gets from conferences, from sporting events, from things like that. There's a big impact, right? And I think that's why we need to do, Carrie may have talked about this, but Boise's in such a good spot right now because people aren't wanting to go to Portland and Seattle and San Francisco
Sure.
and some of the places they traditionally would have gone to, because they want to go somewhere where people feel safe, the streets are clean, right? So we have such an opportunity, and you see it, right, with the Boise Center, I think, is at capacity all the
time,
time, right? I mean, they would love nothing more than probably some sort of new event space. So I think tourism I'm a big component of it. That is something, you're seeing it at the Big Sky Conference right now. The Boise Chamber is a big partner with Visit Boise this year at the Big Sky Conference. That's a great event. It brings in a lot of good things for this community, and we don't want to lose that, right? And so you're going to see the Chamber be a partner in these events and these areas to ensure we keep them, right? And it is just such a draw for all of our hotels, our restaurants, you name it. It really means a lot to this economy.
On the flip side, you kind of have the sort of political landscape.
Yeah.
The NCAA tournament, speaking of basketball,
Yeah.
hasn't been here for a while. There's some uncertainty if it will come
Mhm.
back, and part of that is because of some of the politics. And without getting too deeply into
Right.
that, it does play a role in some of this. How do you
Mhm.
balance that out when people are like, I know it's politics, I don't know.
Yeah.
Good or bad, how do you say, oh, here are some positive things, or how do you work through that?
I think it's about telling the story and selling this area, right? And I think that's what the state's good at in general, right? When it comes to some of these big events, we're always going to be at a disadvantage because we don't operate where we have large sums of money that we can just throw at things,
Sure.
right? And so then, you sometimes take on, there could be the political areas or things that might add extra.
And all states are facing
And
this,
they are.
right?
And
Yeah.
in this issue in particular, I know it's a big one throughout the country, but I think then it's an opportunity for us to really sell this area and what we can offer, right? And I do think when people come here and they see, every economic development specialist is going to sell quality of life, right? It's just like it's a natural.
Yeah.
But when they actually come here and see it, I think people truly are like, wow, this is pretty amazing what they have here.
Let's talk about business attraction and bringing new businesses here. There's obviously been some wins in this space. Micron's expansion, the metadata center, and then lots of smaller wins. Obviously a big focus for lots of people across the area, but important at the Chamber. Explain to us how and what you're doing to help bring additional jobs to the area.
Yeah, and so as we kind of talked about, the Chamber is really unique because we have Visit Boise under us, which is the tourism arm, and then we also have BVEP, Boise Valley Economic Partnership, which is under us. And so Clark has a great team, right? And I think you've seen, right, obviously with Meta and with Micron, some big ones, and like you said, some other smaller ones too, which are just as important, right? Any new business here is a huge win for the state. And what's interesting about it too is Clark's team, right? They go out, as you talk about. So they go out and they're working with the economic development professionals of Caldwell and Nampa and Meridian and CUNA and Mount Home, right? And really helping them as we get these leads and trying to find, what makes sense for a business based on their needs. I think, again, you're going to see the Chamber be a good partner in this area, right? And I think it's, as you look at some of these things, right, it's what's kind of one of the cool things I think about the Micron project is that, okay, now what a great opportunity. And I'd already said this when I was at Commerce is look at what you have and then what can you attract that's a supply chain that then adds value here, but streamlines their products too. And so I think with that, you're going to see a lot of folks that maybe with the supply chain, right? But I think too, that's again, getting back to the business sector and our members, what do they need, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like what strategically are there things that we should be going after, right? And then too, I think when it comes to the Chamber's involvement, it is as every business, be it existing or new, they have things they need, right? And a lot of times it's education. Well, we can be an advocate in trying to help boost up our education and support education efforts. I think there's a huge role right now for the Chamber when it comes to business in general. As we're growing, you have to start talking about housing, right? People have to have a place to live. Public transportation is becoming a reality as, we're sprawl, right? Things are getting pushed out so much further, right? And so being engaged in those efforts to really hear from the business community, okay, what do you need and how can we be part of the effort to help get you that?
On the flip side of that, you've got obviously some chop in the water with Albertsons and Kroger.
Yeah.
Kroger's been absolutely silent on what might happen with Albertsons and Boise.
Mm-hmm.
The Cincinnati Chamber, where Kroger is based, they ran an op-ed about 6 weeks ago, like, we have to have this merger to keep Cincinnati healthy. And it's like, that's great for Cincinnati,
Mhm.
but what happens in the flip?
Yeah.
I know you don't want to probably talk individually about one business,
Mhm.
but how do you help to sort of guard against those things? Or, if that merger goes through and there's changes in jobs, does the chamber play a part in figuring out how to reskill those people or find new
Mhm.
gigs? Or is there a piece to business attraction that's sort of business retainment? It's not
Yeah.
a word, but
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point. And I think, Albertsons is just such a great business, such a great community partner. And so I think everyone is hoping, right, that, whatever happens with this merger, it's good for Idaho,
Right.
right? And thinking positive on that side. And, what can we do to help support that? I do think though, right, as there is going to be business will come and go, right?
Yeah.
And so again, absolutely, that is, connecting the business sector to potential helping in those efforts of reskilling, but also making those connections of, if you have a business that may be leaving or changing, that's a whole
Mhm.
it's a whole talent pool.
Maybe there's gigs
that
at
you
Dairy
could-
Gold, which
right,
is opening
100%.
here.
And so that's been one thing. And I've actually had board members who have brought that up to me, which they're, can the chamber be more active in helping when it comes to like internships and things like that? And so I really think there's a big opportunity for us to get more engaged when it comes to those sort of things.
Okay, so we're talking about what's next. So
Yeah.
we'll end on this.
Okay.
We get 5 years down the road. It's 2029. We're about to start a new decade.
Okay.
You've been in this role for 5 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
What does that look like? What do you look back and say, I really am proud of what we did in that first 5 years?
Yeah, I think for me is if I can point to, again, we've grown our membership, we've maintained our membership, but also too, if I can point to like, an effort or a partnership that we were at the table with, and, it led to good things, right? Like those sort of things, right? That like we were part of that, right? If it's helping on housing, if it's helping on transportation, if it's an education initiative, right? If it's you name it, right? I think for me, it's how I'm structured. If I leave in 5 years, I'm glad you have that much confidence.
I'm not
in
saying
me.
you're leaving in 5 years. Maybe you'll be around forever.
No. But being a good partner, right? Like they were a really good partner and a great resource for our members.
So more housing, smarter workers, better transportation. I'm going to hold you to that.
Yeah, that's.
I'll still be here, so I'll write a story.
That's
in 5
not
years and
there.
look back.
That's a small, right? That's not a small feat.
No,
right? That's
it's
easy. Yeah,
It's all solvable.
I think the great thing about all of those, though, is in the business community, everyone would agree that those are things we have to continue making investments in and work together on. So,
Yeah. And I think the general citizenry too.
100%.
Bobbi-Jo Meuleman with the Boise Metro Chamber of Commerce. Thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.